Hey, so today on Revenge Motion Graphics, we're going to create this, a flock of birds. Okay, they're moving birds, and we're going to make them out of a still image like this with some transparency, and we'll see how we can make this thing fly. Alright, so let's get started here. So I just have a new composition here, standard 1280 by 720, and 10 seconds long, and I have this bird here. So the first thing I'll do is I'll set up the one bird here so that it can be ready to fly. So what I will do is I'm going to grab this bird here, and I'm going to separate it into three sections: the left wing, the right wing, and the body. Okay, so let's go ahead and give that a try here. So I'm just going to grab some masks, grab my pen tool, and I'll start with the left wing here. So I'll just do a mask around the left wing, and let's go ahead and rename this left wing. Duplicate this guy, and let me get rid of that mask, and I'll solo, and now we'll do the right wing. So let's just do a mask around the right wing, and let's call this right wing. Okay, and finally what we'll do is duplicate this again and make one copy of this just for the body. So I'm going to grab a mask around these sections of the bird here, and I didn't do a good job of this, but I will. Let me change my mask color so something I can actually see here. So I will take some of these mask points, and I will kind of readjust them so they're not incorporating the actual body, or rather not incorporating the actual other wings, something like this perhaps. Now I'm not going to be too accurate here, because in the long run it won't really matter that much, but just as long as you're getting a little bit of accuracy, I might even add a point in here, and just a definitive sort of body here. Okay, and then I'll bring in the wings and see how badly I did with my masks here. So let's correct some of this, because I don't want these gaps. So the left side, let me also change my mask, something that I can actually see here. Let's do a darker color. So here I will reshape my mask kind of so that it incorporates a little bit of the body, leaving no gap. Do the same thing on the other side here. Also make this a little bit more visible. And there we go, just something that leaves no gaps. Add an additional point here. Make sure all of it is visible, all the right wing. So I have my right wing, my left wing, and my body. I'll go ahead and rename this body. Okay, so here is the most crucial part of this, is going to be the anchor points. So for example, the left wing, I want my anchor point to be right on that edge, kind of a little bit inside, maybe something like this. And this will help with the flap of the wings, because that's what we'll do. And the same thing with the right wing. I'll also move it a little bit inside here, right on the edge. And the body can pretty much stay where it is. Okay, so now we've got this thing laid out. I got body, right wing, and left wing. Let's go ahead and add a new null. Okay, now here what we'll do is we'll make everything 3D. And here is my null. Now the null and the body, since I centered both of these when I brought them in, or actually they were already centered, they should pretty much be in the same location as far as their anchor points are concerned. So we're good to go there. And these two guys, like I said before, can have their anchor points on the wings, right on the edges. So we're pretty much ready to go here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to parent the body the left wing and the right wing right to that null. Okay, and I can even rename this null the control or something more descriptive. Okay, so what this null is going to do is it's going to sort of control, if I move this thing around, the entire bird here. Let me undo that. But before we do that, let's go ahead and animate some of these wings flapping. So what I will do is go to my unified camera tool and switch this into custom view. And what this does is allows me to navigate around my scene here. Okay, so I'm not doing anything to the camera. I'm not doing anything to the object. I'm just kind of navigating around here. So I'm just going to navigate until I see a little bit of my wings in perspective. Okay, I can even zoom in here a little bit. And I'm using all of this with my unified camera tool, which has these orbit, track X and Y, and track Z tools. Okay. Yeah, so I can navigate around the bird here. So let's make sure everything is correct. Okay, so yeah, the left wing is still on the left. So what I will do is, let me just kind of straighten this out a little bit, is I'm going to click on my left wing here, go to R for rotate. Okay, and what I'm going to do, and by the way, I'm doing all of this in what's known as world access mode. What this is basically is an option that turns off the local coordinates. So if I have my local coordinates turned on, these objects could potentially give me different X, Y, and Z arrows respective to the local object. But if I turn on world coordinates, it should sort of respect the world coordinates in the sense that Y is always up and X is always sideways on the red arrow, and Z, the blue arrow, is forward and backward. Okay, so again, I would go to world access mode. So if I go onto my left wing here, I do want to animate specifically on the Y axis. Okay, so I'm going to click on the Y rotation. As you can see, I can sort of, create a pretty drastic angle here. I'll keep that to minimum. Maybe what I'll do is I'll start with a let's see, let me kind of do a little bit of experimentation here. Let's try maybe 45 degrees. And I'll click on the stopwatch, and then I'll go maybe a second forward, and I'll switch this to minus 45. So we got sort of a motion that looks like this. Okay, now I can change that obviously, but we'll see what it looks like before we do that. Okay. All right, so let's see. Just make sure, what I'm making sure here, by the way, is that there isn't a gap here. So if I see a gap like this, what I could do is double click on my left wing, go into layer mode, and maybe just move some of these points inward a little bit so that that gap is minimized. Let's see if that works. Let's click on our composition here. Yeah, so now we don't see as much of a gap there. Okay. Okay, and what I will do is set both of these to easy ease. So a nice sort of ramping going on. That might be a little slow, so I'll bring these closer together. Okay, so ultimately what I want to do is use an expression to loop this behavior here. So what I will do is option click on the stopwatch here and type in loop out, capital O, open parentheses, type equals quote ping pong. So what this will do is we'll create a loop that allows me to loop the wings flapping back and forth as much as I want here. So if I play this back, see, this continues forever. Okay, so I will do the same thing on the other side, the right wing here. And let's go ahead and go to, again, frame 0, and I can mimic this because from my minimal knowledge of birds flying, I believe that these are synced. The left wing and the right wing are synced in terms of their flapping. So what I could simply do is go to my left wing here, R for rotation, again on the Y axis. What I can even do is copy these points. So Y rotation at frame 0, paste. Now what happens is that obviously you get this, okay, which is normal considering we just copy and pasted. But what I can do is select these keyframes, right click, keyframe assistant, time reverse keyframes, and this will reverse that motion. So now we have something like this. Okay, looks pretty good. And again, I'll make sure that the right wing also has an expression there. Okay, so now we're kind of getting somewhere. Now, if I do see some gaps on the right, I can also do the same thing. You know, what I can do is double click on the right wing and also extend that mask a little bit more. Okay. All right, and finally what I'll do is if I kind of move this around, what I'm noticing is that some of these wings need to sort of be aligned better. So what I'll do is I'll go to my left wing here. Again, make sure your world axis mode is on, direct select tool, and I'll move this on the x-axis. And maybe that's a little too far. Let me undo that. And actually, what I'm just going to do is move it on the z-axis up a little bit, so it's not creating so much of a gap, or rather, it's not offset from the body so much. Maybe like that. Click on this guy also on that axis. Okay, so maybe something like this. So if I rotate this a little bit around, let's see what we got. Okay, so I will actually push this a little bit closer, the left wing a little bit closer to the body, maybe the right wing as well. Okay, so let's see what we got. Yep, that looks pretty good. Don't see any gaps or anything really that bad here. Okay, so this is basically the setup of the bird. It's just kind of flapping around. And now what I can do is I'll go back into my active camera, which basically is the top kind of flat view of this. And now I can actually click on the control. And what I will do, again, I'm going to click on the rotate tool, make sure in world axis mode. I can rotate this bird around, maybe facing sort of the right direction here. On my z-axis, I'll kind of move it forward, or rather rotate it on the z-axis, and kind of have it facing diagonally. And I can push that a little further. So I'm going to again click on my control node here, go to my move tool or select tool rather, and then move this down so now the wings are sort of outside the range. And I'll go ahead and actually make this smaller as well. Again, all controlled by the control node. Okay, so maybe something like this. Again, if you think that the flapping is a little bit too slow, bring those guys closer together. And again, you know, one thing I'm noticing, as I did before, is a little bit more gap here on the left wing. So let's go in on that a little bit, and this is something we can fix, I believe, pretty easily. Let's just move this down. There we go. So now I'm not getting as much gap there, and this is something that you'll just have to deal with if needed, although your result could be a little different if your wings are placed differently. Okay, so there we go. Now we've got this bird sort of at an angle, and I can even, if I want, let me go R for rotation. We can even do a little bit more rotating as needed here. So maybe I want it a little bit more on its side like this. All right, there we go. Now I could have done the same thing with my X, Y, and Z rotation, but orientation is fine in this case. All right, let's move this up just a little bit. Okay, so now we've got our sort of flapping bird here. Now one thing I will do is, again, this is something that I noticed with birds, is when their wings are up, they tend to be lower than when their wings are down, so that they're kind of pushing themselves up. So maybe what I can also do on the control here, P for position, create a keyframe there, raise these guys up a little bit on the down flap, and then bring it back down on the y-axis. So now it kind of does that. Again, I will easy ease these, and I'll copy that same exact loop out expression if I can get to it. Here we go. Right on that position of the null. So now it kind of looks like this. So there is our flapping bird here. Now again, we're not really dealing here with a lot of detail, and that's kind of why one of the reasons that we can actually get away with this rather simple motion here. So there we go. Let me go back into my rotation a little bit, orientation, and I'll kind of want to rotate it a little bit more like this on the x-axis here. Okay, looks pretty good. All right, and now just so that everything is nice and efficient and all that, we're going to pre-compose this whole entire thing. Let's go ahead and go layer, pre-compose, and let's call this main bird flapping. At least that's what I think that motion is called, flapping wings, right? Okay, so there it is. Since we have this as a pre-comp, I kind of want to get rid of all this extra space, so I will double click inside this pre-comp, and I just want to get rid of a lot of this extra space here. So maybe what I'll do is I'll click on my region of interest. Now this has a lot of different uses. One of them is you can actually draw out an area for an object in this case, and maybe we'll get rid of some space this way. Now I'm gonna make sure there's enough room for the wings as well as the bottom. Nothing gets clipped here. And then what I'll do is go to composition, crop comp to region of interest. Okay, so now we've got that bird pretty much only in our scene. Now I can also move the bird up here a little bit, or I can Command K, increase the height a little bit as well. Now, since I know what I'm going to do with this, I do want to make sure that after the crop, I do have an exact square width and height. This will help with the next step, which is going to be particles. All right, so there we go. And let me rename this rather than comp to, I'll just call this flying birds, and you can see some of the properties I have here. There we go. So now we've got our bird here. Okay, so now I'm going to make a new solid here. Doesn't matter what color, make sure it's make comp size, and I'll add an effect, CC particle world, and I'll put this onto my solid. So by default, and let me turn my bird off here, I'll go to off transparency. This is what we have, you know, not really useful for our purpose. And we're going to do a lot of tweaking to this so that we get birds flying. So I will do a solid background here and make it kind of a gray background. Put that on the bottom. And let's just rename this BKG for background. And for our particles here, let's go ahead and get started here. So I'm going to open up a lot of these things. Let's twirl down physics, particles, all that stuff. So first thing I'll do is I'm going to, if I play this back, things are going really fast and things are not going in the right direction. So let me change this to 50%. First thing I'll do is I'll change my animation from explosive to direction. And now I have sort of it going sideways here. Then I will increase my radius of my producer here. So it kind of is doing this thing. And I will change the velocity. Let's bring that down to maybe a 0.1. Don't really need gravity in this case, 0. And we get something like this. Again, not really what we want. Let's also, for right now, zero out extra angle and extra angle. And I'm going to change my particle type to textured quad polygon. So what this will do basically is ask me under the texture, what layer do I want to use as my texture? And again, we're going to use main bird flapping, so I'll do main bird flapping. And if you play this back, let me go to fit, we get all these birds kind of, you know, not really flying, they're just kind of being thrown around here. So let's fix all of that. So what I will do is I will, for right now, increase my birth and death size. So if I switch these to larger values, maybe even something like a 1 for each. Okay, and again we get this kind of crazy thing going on here. So what's happening here is that this is adding a lot of rotation, it's adding a lot of unnecessary stuff to all of our scene here. So I'm going to zero some of these out. So let's see, we're going to zero out a couple things here. First thing we'll do is we're going to zero out rotation speed and initial rotation. So they're all kind of flying in the same direction. Okay, and then we got some other problems here. One is there's way too many of these guys. So our birth rate, let's just limit that down to like a 0.1. Okay, so that's going to give us just a couple of these birds. And longevity, we'll crank that up to maybe 15. So now we've got something like this. So obviously we're getting there, but there are other problems here. So one of the things is there's a lot of opacity going on, a lot of opacity animation, which I don't want. I will go down to the bottom and I will set my max opacity to 100%. And more importantly, I will go to opacity map. And this is basically why it's sort of fading in and fading out at the birth and the death. I will take my pen tool here, or rather, if I just hover over this, I get a pen tool. And I'm just going to make this one constant color, basically like this. So what this is basically is a way to control opacity, but if it's something that is a constant color, it should not have any opacity change. Okay, so this is what we have. Okay, so it looks better, not great, but better. Next thing I'll do, I'll go to my position X and I'll move my emitter sort of out of view here because I don't want my birds to sort of appear right in the middle of my center of my screen here. So now I have these birds coming from someplace. Okay, now there's still way too many of these guys, and I can't go lower than 0.1. Like I can't put in a 0.05 because it will still take me to 0.1. But what I can do is I can animate this. So for example, if I click on the stopwatch and let it play out, I can maybe at this point change this to 0. And what this is going to do is just give me a couple of birds and then stop emitting. Okay. Now, if there's too little birds, I can always move this further out, and that way it will go to 0 a little bit later while still emitting some of these birds. Okay, so maybe what I'll do is I'll push this out a little more here. Okay, so maybe something like that. All right, and now the main other problem is they're all flapping sort of robotically at the same time. And that is because what's happening is that the particle itself is taking its particle at its current texture time, which is current. So let's change this from start. And now we have slight variation to them kind of flapping around. Okay, still not as much as we want, so maybe what I'll do is I'll increase a couple things, and one of those things I will do is if you go to the extras, this is just one variation of the randomness here. I can mess around with this a little bit. and get a couple other different variations. So if I'm not happy with the first one, maybe something like that perhaps. And since they're all still kind of uniform, more or less, I can also increase what we basically zeroed out before, and that is the extra angle. So I can increase that a little bit, and what that's going to do is sort of randomize a little bit of their fly pattern here. Okay, and maybe I'll go back and increase some velocity as well. Now we kind of brought it down, so let's just do a 0.25. Yeah, that's a little better. That gives them a little bit more life, I think, than just having them move so slow. Okay, so now we're getting a little bit better result here. Okay, and you can also play around kind of to taste here. For example, I can, if I increase my radius here, the birds will have a much wider range across my screen here. Or I can bring that down to kind of a tight area and have it just in the center, going left to right. So it's kind of up to you. Okay. Now, one thing that I'm noticing also is that some of these birds are still not quite as dark as I want them to be. Let me go to fit here. So I'm going to add a new adjustment layer. And let's put an effect, color correction curves. And what I'll simply do is increase the contrast of this a little bit, so the birds are more or less black here. There we go. So now we've got a little bit more definition, at least in terms of contrast. Okay. All right, and then one other thing I'll add to this from my adjustment layer, I'm going to add something called CC Force Motion Blur. What this is going to do is going to create motion blur, because I had a hard time actually turning on the motion blur in my main birds flapping here and have it transfer to this. So instead, I think a workaround is put that on the adjustment layer, and it will create a little bit of a motion blur for these birds. It'll take a little longer to kind of give you a preview, but not too bad. Okay, so we're looking pretty good here, and there's some other kind of properties we can mess around with in our particle system. For example, I can always go back into my scatter settings. There is scatter. I can increase that a little bit. What that's going to do is, again, randomize a little bit more of the motion here. It will also bring some of the birds closer to the camera, some of them away from the camera, in this case a virtual camera. And so, some things that you might want to look out for is things like these birds kind of flapping close to each other, because these look kind of robotic. So again, you can always mess around with the random seed and have a different variation on the flights. Alright, so that's the basic tutorial. So you can actually use this to have, generate your own birds, bats, butterflies, whatever you guys are into, And let me switch this Y radius back to where I had it before. And feel free to play around with this, because ultimately it's just a very non-destructive way of creating these things. Alright, well, thanks for joining me for another episode of Revenge Motion Graphics. Feel free to comment, like, subscribe, and all that, and I'll be making more of these as I go along.